There's a rumor going around right now, barely a few days old, that Marvel Studios is quietly hunting for an actor to play a version of the Hulk that isn't really the Hulk at all. He's smarter than Bruce Banner ever let himself become. He's crueler than this franchise has ever allowed the character to be on screen. And in the comics, he didn't just show up for one fight inside Secret Wars. He ruled part of it. If even a fraction of this rumor holds up, Marvel isn't quietly adding another Hulk variant to an already stacked cast. They might be building toward one of the darkest character turns this franchise has ever attempted, and almost nobody's connected all the pieces sitting out in the open yet. Let's start with the actual claim, because it's worth being precise about where this comes from before we go any further. Days ago, a Marvel scooper who goes by James Mack posted that Marvel Studios is actively looking for someone to play the Maestro, specifically for Avengers, Secret Wars, not Doomsday, Secret Wars, the film that's supposed to close out this entire saga in 2027. That single claim is the entire spark behind this investigation. And it deserves the same treatment any single sourced leak deserves, taken seriously, not taken as fact. So who is the Maestro, and why would this specific character, out of every villain in 80+ years of Marvel Comics, be the one Marvel's reportedly chasing right now? He first appeared in December of 1992 in a miniseries called The Incredible Hulk Future Imperfect, written by Peter David with art by George Perez. And the premise is exactly as bleak as it sounds. Decades in the future, on a timeline designated Earth 9200, most of Earth's heroes are gone, wiped out in a nuclear war. Bruce Banner survived, the same way he always survives. But decades of accumulated radiation exposure did something to him nobody saw coming. It didn't just make him stronger, it made him smarter, sharper, and completely unrestrained, stripping away every piece of Banner's conscience while keeping every ounce of his intellect intact. What's left calls himself the Maestro. And he doesn't smash cities out of rage anymore. He rules over the wreckage on purpose, wearing trophies from the heroes he's already beaten, because in his world, there's nobody left capable of stopping him. What made Future Imperfect land so hard with readers in 1992, and what still makes the character genuinely unsettling more than 3 decades later, is that Maestro isn't a stronger Hulk. He's a worse Bruce Banner. Every other classic Hulk villain works by being more powerful, more monstrous, more physically overwhelming than the Hulk himself. Maestro flips that completely. He wins through patience, through manipulation, through decades of unchecked political and physical control, the exact traits that make Banner brilliant in the present timeline, curdled into something genuinely cruel once there's nobody left to hold him accountable. That's a fundamentally different kind of threat than anything the MCU has put in front of Bruce Banner so far. And it's exactly the kind of threat this franchise hasn't really explored. Not what happens when the Hulk gets angrier, but what happens when Bruce Banner gets to keep all his intelligence and simply stops caring about the consequences of using it. Here's the detail that turns this from an interesting deep-cut villain into something that actually connects to Secret Wars specifically. And it's the piece most casual coverage of this rumor has been skipping entirely. Maestro isn't just a Hulk story Marvel could theoretically adapt. He already has a canon role inside the exact comic event this movie is drawing its name from. When the 2015 Secret Wars split the surviving multiverse into different regions of Doom's patchwork planet, Battleworld, Maestro was handed control of one of those regions outright, a domain called Dystopia, ruling it the same way he's ruled every wasteland he's ever been given. He wasn't a guest star in that story. He was one of the actual power structures holding Battleworld together underneath Doom, one of a small handful of beings Doom trusted, or feared, enough to let govern a fragment of his empire without constant oversight. That detail matters more once you remember how Battleworld itself was built. In the comics, Doom didn't create Battleworld out of nothing. He stitched it together from the surviving fragments of destroyed universes, and the domains he handed out afterward went to figures who represented some of the most dangerous, most singular threats the collapsing multiverse had produced. Putting Maestro in that company isn't a throwaway cameo choice on the comics' part. It's an explicit statement that Marvel already considered him one of the handful of villains powerful and stable enough to actually hold a fragment of a broken reality together, the exact scenario this saga is already confirmed to be building toward on screen. That's not a loose thematic connection somebody's stretching to make a video work. That's a direct, textual link between the villain this rumor names and the exact story structure Marvel has already confirmed it's adapting. If you've been tracking every one of these Secret Wars threads as closely as we have, you already know how satisfying it is when a rumor actually lines up with something concrete instead of just sounding cool. And that's exactly why this channel exists. So stick around and hit subscribe, because the next piece of this actually gets stranger. Now layer in what's already been building inside the MCU's own Hulk storyline, because Maestro wouldn't be arriving out of nowhere. She-Hulk Attorney at Law ended its season with a reveal that Bruce Banner has a son, Scar, raised away from Earth on Sakaar, a character whose entire comic history is built around Hulk-adjacent power and legacy, and whose live-action introduction was treated as a genuine surprise rather than a throwaway gag. That single reveal told longtime fans something important. Marvel was willing to reach into deeper, more obscure Hulk family comic lore for material, not just recycle the same Green Rage monster stories audiences had already seen through 3 solo films. Mark Ruffalo has also spent years publicly describing his own pitch for a proper Hulk story, one that pushes past the integrated, even-tempered Smart Hulk persona audiences have watched since Endgame, and finally lets the character's darker, more dangerous edges actually matter again. Ruffalo has talked openly about wanting to explore that tension between Banner's control and the Hulk's rage rather than resolve it permanently, which is worth remembering, because Maestro is essentially the nightmare version of exactly that unresolved tension. A Banner who stopped fighting for control and simply let himself win by giving in completely. And there's been a genuinely long-running industry rumor, well before this specific Maestro report, about a World War Hulk project sitting somewhere in Marvel's back pocket, based on the 2007 comic event where an enraged Hulk returns from exile to tear through the heroes who banished him. None of those threads mention Maestro by name. All of them point toward the same unresolved appetite. Marvel knows it's sitting on a version of the Hulk story it hasn't told yet, and Bruce Banner is one of the only original Avengers who hasn't gotten a real villain turn, or a real reckoning with what happens when his power finally outpaces his ability to control it. Ruffalo's actual status for Secret Wars is where this needs a reality check, though, because it's the part most breakdowns of this rumor gloss over. Mark Ruffalo has not been officially confirmed for Avengers Secret Wars. What he has been confirmed for is Avengers Doomsday, releasing this December, in a cast that also includes Chris Evans, Chris Hemsworth, Pedro Pascal, Vanessa Kirby, Joseph Quinn, Ebon Moss-Bachrach, Letitia Wright, and Florence Pugh. That's Doomsday's cast. Secret Wars' full lineup hasn't been revealed at all, which means the specific claim that Ruffalo, or any version of Hulk, is locked into the Maestro role for that film is still sitting entirely on one scooper's post. There's also a casting name worth mentioning here, because it's genuinely one of the more entertaining threads floating around this rumor. Matthew McConaughey has talked openly in interviews about wanting to play a Marvel role after passing on opportunities earlier in his career, and fan speculation has repeatedly circled back to Maestro as the part that would actually fit him, a grizzled, philosophical, dangerously charismatic ruler is exactly the kind of villain McConaughey's built a career playing. Someone who talks in half riddles while radiating the kind of unearned confidence that comes from actually having won already. Nothing here is confirmed either, and McConaughey's name isn't attached to the current casting search in any official capacity. It's worth including precisely because it shows how much this specific casting idea has already taken hold in the fan and industry conversation, independent of this week's actual leak, which tells you something about how obvious a fit Maestro already feels to people who've been watching this saga develop for years. It's worth imagining, briefly, what actually landing this reveal would look like on screen, because that's part of why the idea has stuck with fans for so long. Not a surprise cameo tacked onto a mid-credits scene, but a proper reveal. Bruce Banner or a Hulk variant stepping into a ruined Battleworld domain expecting to find chaos, and instead finding order, a throne built out of the wreckage, and a version of himself that never bothered fighting for control in the first place. That's the kind of image this franchise hasn't given Bruce Banner in over a decade of screen time, a mirror instead of a monster, and it's exactly the kind of moment that makes theory videos like this one worth making in the first place. So let's actually stress test this theory the way it deserves, because a good investigation doesn't just stack up reasons to believe something, it looks hard for reasons not to. First counter-argument, single-sourced scoops about specific actor searches are exactly the kind of leak that tends not to survive contact with an actual announcement. Casting rumors shift constantly during pre-production, roles get merged, cut, or reassigned to different characters entirely, and actively looking for an actor doesn't mean a role or even a character is locked. Second, several of the same rumor threads discussing Maestro also mention that his proper MCU introduction might actually be reserved for a separate, later World War Hulk project instead of Secret Wars, meaning even people inside the rumor ecosystem don't agree on which movie he's supposedly heading toward. Third, and maybe the most practical objection, Secret Wars already has to juggle Doctor Doom, the Fantastic Four, multiple confirmed Spider-Man variants, an expanding X-Men roster, and whatever's left of the Avengers after Doomsday. Adding an entirely new Dark Future Hulk storyline into a film already carrying that much weight risks turning Maestro into a 5-minute cameo instead of the genuinely dangerous villain the comics built him to be, which would waste one of the more interesting character concepts Marvel has sitting on the shelf. There's a fourth objection worth taking seriously too, and it's less about scheduling than about tone. Maestro's entire comic identity depends on a future that's already happened. Decades of accumulated devastation the audience never got to see firsthand. That works beautifully across an ongoing comic run with decades of continuity behind it. It's a much harder thing to sell inside a single crossover film, where Marvel would need to either explain an entire ruined future history in a handful of scenes, or lean on the audience simply accepting Maestro's authority without earning it on screen. Doing that justice, without turning him into an exposition dump, is a genuine writing challenge, not just a scheduling one. It's also worth being honest about the weaker pieces of evidence circulating around this theory, because not everything getting attached to this rumor holds up, and a real investigation has to be willing to throw out the pieces that don't survive scrutiny. There's a fan theory making the rounds that Spider-Man Brand New Day quietly hints Bruce Banner glimpsed a version of himself as Maestro while wielding the Infinity Stones back in Endgame, and has been using some kind of inhibitor ever since to suppress that outcome. It's an appealing idea on the surface, the kind of thing that would retroactively make an existing scene feel like foreshadowing. But even inside the communities discussing it, that read gets pushed back on hard, and there's no solid textual evidence connecting Brand New Day's banner material to Maestro specifically, just a resemblance fans have projected onto footage that was never built to carry that meaning. It's the kind of theory worth flagging exists, because it shows how eager fans already are to find Maestro hiding in plain sight, not worth treating as an actual clue. That eagerness itself is worth sitting with for a second, separate from whether any individual piece of evidence holds up. When an audience starts finding a specific villain in scenes that were never actually about him, that's usually a sign the character has already become inevitable in the collective imagination of the fandom, whether or not Marvel has made a single official move toward him yet. It doesn't prove the rumor true. It does tell you Maestro has crossed some threshold from obscure comic reference into something fans are actively expecting, which is exactly the kind of appetite Marvel has historically been willing to feed once it's built up this much momentum organically. So where does that actually leave us? Here's the case for taking this seriously anyway, even with all of that skepticism on the table. Marvel has spent years publicly signaling unfinished business with Hulk's darker comic history, through Ruffalo's own comments, through Scar's reveal, through a persistent industry appetite for a World War Hulk story that's never quite materialized. Secret Wars is already structurally built around Battleworld, Doom ruling over fragments of a collapsed multiverse, which is the exact scenario Maestro already has a canon role inside. You don't need a leak to arrive at Maestro being a strong theoretical fit for this story. The comics already handed Marvel that blueprint a decade ago. What the leak actually adds isn't the theory itself. It's a specific, current signal that Marvel might be moving on it now rather than saving it for later, and timing is precisely the piece a theory like this can never fully verify on its own. It's also worth weighing how this rumor compares to other Secret Wars casting reports that have already proven accurate. The Fantastic Four's Earth 828 origins, Doctor Doom's connection to that same universe, and the returning X-Men actors were all rumored in some form before Marvel officially confirmed them, and in each case the eventual reveal matched the shape of the earlier reporting even when specific details shifted along the way. That doesn't guarantee this leak plays out the same way, but it does mean dismissing every single sourced Secret Wars rumor outright would have meant dismissing several things that turned out to be true. Here's the actual verdict, and it's worth being precise instead of overselling it either direction. This is not confirmed. Ruffalo has zero official attachment to Secret Wars as of right now, let alone to playing Maestro specifically. But the structural case for Maestro fitting somewhere in this saga is stronger than most casting rumors ever get, because it isn't built on a leak alone. It's built on a version of the character that already has a documented canon place inside the exact comic event Marvel is adapting. If this rumor is wrong about the specific film, don't be surprised if Maestro still shows up eventually. In Secret Wars, in a future Hulk project, or in whatever comes after this saga wraps. The version of this story that would surprise me isn't Marvel using Maestro somewhere down the line. It's Marvel sitting on a villain this perfectly suited to its own multiverse, ending and never using him at all.